Markle now has really addressed herself in her very first podcast. And as you can see, there's lots of info there that's really easy to pick apart, as many people already have. Today, what I wanted to focus on this very special by royal appointment was the fact that this is nothing new. What we're seeing here is a replication of characters. And this normally happens when you are a celebrity. You know, you mold yourself into the character that people want you to be, particularly at that time and place. And this is part and parcel of the problem now for Meghan. You see, now she's a little bit lost. She's not quite sure who she is. The other day, you see, we found out the fact that she's still been signing herself as Her Royal Highness, and there's more about that later. But what's fascinating about that whole aspect is, without that, she's really just another jobbing actress. And what we saw when she teamed up with a real Oscar winner, with Gwyneth Paltrow, was she kind of hoped that would rub off and people would now suddenly decide, this is a wonderful, great respect. Here I am standing with somebody who is at points respected in the Hollywood community. It's not been easy for both Meghan and Harry because, of course, they went over there and their kudos was, their selling point, if you think about it, was just being ex-royals. And that would have been enough if they'd have played their cards right. But when you cast your mind back to the pitfalls and problems right up to even the last couple of days, today I want to share with you what I've discovered along the way. As ever, let me explain. Chums, lovely to see you today in the very heart of Hyde Park. I hope you're all keeping well on a blisteringly warm day, but it's beautiful. We shouldn't complain. Well, we always will, won't we? Do you know what I did notice, though? It's so funny, isn't it? You noticed how everybody capitalises on a bit of heat, because literally going into the supermarket on the way up here, I noticed that the ice creams have suddenly been put up by 40 pence, 40%. And I thought, goodness, you know, it doesn't just a heat and then bang, they're straight up. Or like, you know, everybody capitalises on everything. You could say the same thing, of course, about the former royal known as Meghan Markle, because what I really wanted to focus on first was that this is kind of interesting, in fact, as to exactly how that particular ex-royal operates. Because podcast with Jamie, the woman, in my opinion, who was either doing a very good impression of Karen from Will and Grace, or in fact that is truly her voice. It's very difficult to sit and listen through somebody who's permanently excited, you know, I'm sure you'll agree. But we all have our flaws, right? Some people are natural communicators. Perhaps setting up £1 billion business is enough, you know. But again, that's really the sort of story behind that particular lady. She struck a deal, struck lucky, and made herself a billionaire. Not bad. That doesn't necessarily mean you are a fabulous interviewer, but money talks. And this is exactly the thing that is, well, all about Meghan and Harry. They desperately need money now, more than ever, because their lifestyle and what they're burning through, particularly Meghan as she launches her jam range, etc. Well, you know, it costs setting up a business, and it costs making sure you don't flop. But cast your mind back to the very first sort of start of this whole episode, where Meghan was given wonderful opportunities, never seen before opportunities, to a former cable TV actress. Forget the Christmas invite. Remember the Vogue debacle, right? Cast your minds back to that. When she got the Vogue situation, there everybody was very excited at Vogue. Suddenly, you know, they've got a royal guest editing, you know, the magazine, which is failing dramatically. Now, the idea really was that she was going to have this Forces for Change, Changes of Nature, whatever it was called. But really what they wanted, truly what they wanted, was a real royal, not Meghan Markle, but she would do, because that was the link into the royals. Now, many people know the story about the Queen being left out. What you don't know is this. You see, behind the scenes, what was going on was the fact that, according to a well-placed source who now no longer works at Vogue, or indeed works for Meghan Markle, you see how that worked? Well, the thing is, they were guaranteed, apparently, something special from Her Majesty the Queen. And the idea, if you think about it, and cast your mind back to that, there was Meghan Markle, if you remember, chatting to all of these celebrities, Salma Hayek, Jane Fonda, etc. Some we'd never heard of, but apparently they were forces for change, etc. And the idea really was that Meghan eventually was going to get something rather special from the late Queen. Now, obviously she couldn't do an interview, but the way it being sold was the fact that, well, it wouldn't be a problem because, look, she was willing to do anything for her grandson Harry, including appearing, if you remember, on that Invictus spoof alongside the then President Michelle and Barack Obama. And she played along very well. and clearly wanted to please, and I think at that point in her life was looking to people please, wanted to make people happy. This is now what she could do, take a foot off the gas if you like, because suddenly, although she's the monarch, things are moving in a different direction. But what happened, you see, was when they said to the Queen, according to this source, and as ever, allegedly, well, would you be interested? She didn't really think this was important because obviously, she didn't want to get into anything political, and at that point she wasn't fully sure what the feature was. Not only that, she said, look, I'm not a force of nature or a force of change. I am literally, is my life of service. And this is what I was told from, as I say, a wonderful source. And the idea really was to sort of, at her age, like wave a flag saying, look what I've done, wasn't the thing that, she wanted to do. That Meghan was persistent. And according to that source, Meghan then, when that failed, decided to do the age-old trick of writing one of her very special letters. You see, she couldn't get a meeting with Her Majesty the Queen. That wasn't possible, even with her connections to, of course, the grandson and being married into the family. So that didn't necessarily work. And at the end of it, what really took a turn for the worst was the fact that, well, there was a situation which is now very much heavily publicised. And this was when Meghan was told off by the late Queen about how she was treating members of staff. They're not servants, they're assistants and people that help, guide and manoeuvre the royals into the right situations. Apparently, Meghan was mortified that she was told off, because really what she was doing was trying to modernise the monarchy. What had gone wrong? Suddenly, the persistence, the letter, the push, the Queen being involved in any level, well, that went quiet. And according to the source that worked at Vogue, they very quickly realised that actually that was never going to happen. But while they were still relatively thrilled to have her on board, what about Catherine? No, Catherine could never be involved in that. And so they very much accepted what you then saw, which was Meghan ringing people up who she'd never met, and over mugs of steaming hot mint tea, as she pointed out, and lots of chat. She became heavily involved in securing being a guest editor for Vogue. But the big story here, the big takeaway, I would say, is the fact that at this particular point, Meghan Markle decided that because the Queen had done something she didn't like and, told off, whatever you want to call it, bam, you were out. And we saw that even the other day. Let me explain. To give you an idea how this really operates in this world of celebrity. Recently, as you know, Meghan sat down with that particular podcaster, and it was a very sort of strange setup, wasn't it? There we were, just two women in their pajamas, makeup free, if you believe that, right? And truly, you kind of think to yourself, oh right, so this is a new reinvention, this is the next phase. Suddenly the businesswoman, the place at the table, that's now all gone. But basically Jamie said, I'm going to ask you the hard questions. And the hard questions were really tedious and dull. And I think this would be very detrimental to Jamie as a businesswoman, literally further down the line, because clearly this was a soft soap interview that had been agreed, as I told you in the past, with questions very much rehearsed in advance. So, you could get all the clues and the pushing the hair back and the tears and all that sort of stuff. One area that they couldn't talk about was past successes, and I use that term loosely. You see, if you remember, when Meghan started out, she had the Spotify deal, and that literally millions slipped through her fingers. That didn't stop the boss of Spotify coming out and basically hitting out and saying a bunch of grifters, and basically, they weren't very talented as audio talent, podcasters, whatever you want to call them. That wasn't allowed to be asked about. Now, really, Meghan wants to get that story, that version of events out of there, and this is the reason why. You see, she doesn't like the term that's been labelled next to her, not necessarily Harry, but as grifters, and she feels if she could address that in the way that she's addressed everything up until this point, through her constant looking at the magazines, the online platforms, and all those secret social media accounts, well, this is exactly how she does it. But she can't. You see, Spotify have got a very much watertight clause in their contract. And if she suddenly was to say the wrong thing in an interview, then they still could retain portions back of her royalties that are still owed even after all this time, because it takes a long time for royalties to be calculated. And of course, let's not forget that her latest company, Lemonade, did the second run of archetypes, archetypes, whatever you want to call it. So you understand that couldn't be spoke about. Again, where this gets even more interesting is there were, as I say, hard questions, right? And the hard questions you might have said was, well, not only are you a successful TV personality with your, as ever with love, Meghan on Netflix, getting one of the biggest streaming giants to pay you millions, you're a podcaster, you're an author, you know. But guess what? She didn't want to talk about these things. Now, cast your mind back, of course, to very much Meghan in entrepreneurial mode, when very quickly she roped in the likes of Oprah Winfrey to help promote Clever Coffee, because she'd invested in it, right? She believed in the product so much, even starring in a spoof ad. That would have been a wonderful conversation as to, well, how did you get involved in that? What spiked your interest? You know, what has the successes and the pitfalls been? But that is very much now a closed book. You understand? That will come out in the fullness of time, but that is a closed book because of the backlash regarding certain elements of the coffee brand, as ever, allegedly. So we can't go down that path. And this is where it makes it very difficult, unless, of course, you have Markle writing the questions. Another problem that they had, they couldn't speak about this. Sesta Collective, or Sesta handbags, whatever you call them, right? This was because, again, another big product that allegedly Meghan wholeheartedly believed in, and then a little bit of scratching away at the surface. And it turns out, in fact, that the people were paid peanuts to make these very expensive designer bags. And the problem again that you have with that is it goes down to all these perilous problems of, well, did you know that? And what have you done to rectify it? And, you know, but clearly Meghan doesn't have the time to rectify this because she's too busy telling the nanny what to do and consequently moaning about just how hard and tough her life might be, barely managing to brush her teeth before the day starts and endless meetings, right? But even more softer aspects of the whole thing, which could have been explored, like, for instance, SmartWorks, you know, the thing that she started out over here, or shall we just say, became involved with over here in her short time inside the British monarchy. I always thought that was a really good project about really helping women to get restarted in the right look, the right clothes, perhaps going for a, you know, an audition, a job, a new start in life. That, if that was successful, should have been explored. But again, a few problems attached to that. You get the picture. There's always the same record, and this is part and parcel of the problem, because with each reinvention you can never go back. You see, many people will realise, and the smart people who watch this channel on a regular basis will know, that Meghan never returns for seconds. I'm not talking, of course, about that infamous jam. Oh, no. I'm talking about the way that she never re-pops back up on anything, whether that be, you know, Vanity Fair, whether that be Vogue, or say the Drew Barrymore show, or, you know, whatever. They never seemingly, even CBS Sunday, if you remember, they went on there to talk about, you know, the perils of social media, and everything behind that was a debacle and a bit of a mess and diva antics and stuff. But of course, it's never really her fault, but they can never go back. And this is where it makes it very difficult if you are working in the world of celebrity with a difficult client, as ever, allegedly. You see, by the time you've burned a lot of those bridges, the things become less and less. Very difficult, in fact, to pop together, because they say, well, unless you have somebody bigger that we're now really interested in, then we're not going to take X anymore because they're too difficult. And Meghan herself slipped up on that chat with the podcaster by saying, you know, I have to think about all the things that I'm going to put out on social media, the hair, what I'm going to wear, all of that sort of stuff. You know, that was the pivotal point. It wasn't about the business, or indeed, is the business making money? And let me tell you something, the business is costing millions and it's not turning around a profit. Here's how I know. Parcel also of the problem for Meghan Markle and her brand, as it were, as ever, jams, whatever you want to call it, is it's just not very well costed. It's too expensive to run. Now, obviously, Meghan likes to pretend that she's very hands-on with the brand. If you remember in the previous interview, she talked about the boxing and the tissue and the size of the box and the feel of the paper. That's all very nice, but that actually is not business. You see, just looking at the jam itself is unprofitable, even though it's mass marketed. The way Meghan's marketing it, of course, is as a princess. And if you doubt that, just listen to what she said again in the podcast interview with Jamie. Basically, this girl had written in and she was inspirational. And if only she could get the life, that Meghan had got, etc. Well, that's quite simple, isn't it? Marry rich. You're not a businesswoman, you're not a great actress. Basically, you married rich. That would be the lesson that you could put out there. But back to the actual business in situ, as it were, because the bottom line is Meghan, as you know, basically had these big boxes put together to pop jams in. And the idea that these would become collector's items. And it was the sort of thing that would look, in their eyes, good on the shelves of the likes of Fortnum & Mason, Harrods, Bloomingdale's, that sort of stuff. The idea really was that this was a super rich, luxurious brand that, well, if the famous love it so much, i.e. Gwyneth Paltrow, Oprah Winfrey, well, me minions like you and I will just follow suit very quickly. Might be a rare treat, but nonetheless, it would be a treat, and suddenly we might buy it. But of course, Meghan has no idea about business. And as what she's pointed out, and when you look at the things, she's like a 10-year-old on Instagram. And I'm not knocking that. If I had my big poster literally up in Times Square, that has happened, by the way, just sort of let you know. But if you did have that big poster up in Times Square, you'd be like me, squealing with delight and taking pictures. And that's exactly what she's done. That's for her, podcast. But it doesn't sell anything. You see, nothing's risen up since, of course, those ads in Times Square have gone up, and they cost a lot of money. Now, a lot of people are suggesting that these ads were being paid for by Amazon. Now, what would be interesting there is Amazon will cut you a deal, but somewhere along the line, somebody has to pay for them. And when you put it in the world's biggest advertising space, like Times Square, that really doesn't get you any more because you're fighting for eyeballs and people are busy, they're looking down, they're on their phones. It doesn't necessarily work. What Meghan should have done and refuses to do would be to integrate with many other popular podcasters and try and maneuver her way in there by suggesting people listen to her because we had this person. But Meghan, according to the staff source, basically believes that she's such a strong power individually, she wouldn't need other people to do that. Hence the reason she sat down with a billionaire makeup IT person, whatever. Jamie, you see, Jamie was the sort of person that Meghan aspires to be. But if you look a little bit at Jamie's background individually, you'll realise she struck lucky. She tried everything from being a TV anchor, weather girl, whatever. I admire that, I'm not knocking it, but she struck lucky with an idea. And then consequently, Jamie can go round to other business sort of conferences telling you how to do it and how she made it big. But it's a fluke, it's a one-off thing. You work hard at it and suddenly L'Oreal come across and say, we'll buy it. You don't knock those ideas or those opportunities away. Jam is a totally different problem. And of course, Meghan decided to use a very exclusive company to start to deliver those jams to all the people that she felt, well, worthy of receiving it. It wasn't just any company though. This was a chauffeur-driven, custom-delivered, white-gloved hand company. Now, where it gets interesting, as many people may or may not know, is when she recently sent her jam over to the Good Morning Britain weatherman, the famous man that fell out with her, person who she decided to get fired on Good Morning Britain by putting a call directly in to the ITV boss. Well, that company is run by the weatherman's wife. You get the picture. So everything's connected, right? So suddenly, of course, this guy's going to put it up like, look what I received. Well, you're being paid to deliver the jams. Of course you received a pot of jam. And once again, if I was ITV, it's a strange thing, isn't it? Because suddenly you've got your presenters endorsing products. No wonder they didn't want to actually endorse this on the ITV brand. They would have known the same thing. Bit odd. It's a little bit like, of course, the presenter on ITV, Andy Peters, travels around the world. Meanwhile, the weather girl's telling us all about climate change. But Andy owns the company that puts the prizes together. You see how everything's truly interconnected. You get the picture. But back to the jams. So she decided that this company was going to deliver them, and that was going to be such an experience that the likes of Fortnum's or Harrods, Selfridges, Harvey Nicks, etc. would be so enamoured at her business acumen. Well, naturally, they would call for meetings and then decide exactly where they were going to go moving forward. it didn't exactly take off. And the bigger problem now that you have is that really, as a brand, and we're not just talking about the crepes, the jams, whatever, it's the whole package of what Meghan's trying to sell. Picking flowers with her children on Instagram, or just, playing sweet music and calling it Sweet Pea Sunday. It's all a little bit dated. Now also, in the midst of all of this, there's another about Meghan Markle literally getting through millions. People forget exactly the level of money that she spent. And many might say through her misdemeanors. You see, cast your mind back also when she tried very hard to get a CEO on board for, originally, American Riviera Orchard. And at the time, if you remember, I told you how difficult people found the job to be. You see, part and parcel of the idea, and this happens with a lot of companies now, is that you're supposed to submit your ideas, and then of course once you've submitted them, if they like them and then you could come up with more, well then you may get the job. But you see, nobody really could live up to Meghan's high expectations of what she thought her brand was, even though she cluelessly had no idea what the brand was. You get the picture. And so very quickly, American Riviera cost a lot of money. And, this is the important point where people think, no, these people are clever. No, they're not. Think about the patent, the problem, the name branding. All of those things have to go through lawyers, back and forth emails, letters, coupled, of course, with Harry's endless litigation with newspapers over here in the United Kingdom, his current security case against His Majesty's government with the Home Office. This is a lot of money. And then let's not forget American Riviera, with all of the big fanfare of the fussy video and everything like that, you're not allowed to mention that. And again, I go back to what I was saying with the sit down with the podcast. Wouldn't that have been good to be explored, to say, well, that was an absolute disaster, but this is what I learned from it, Be careful about that, check out names. No, you can never, ever in Meghan's world have a problem. It's not your problem. Somebody else should have dealt with that, as she slipped up also by revealing that she had a nanny for 5 years. But the previous story was she couldn't make it to Invictus on times because she had milk runs and burger runs and all sorts of stuff while looking after young children. You get the picture again. So you see contradiction at every single corner. Now, the reason why this latest adventure is costing such a lot of money is really, it's all of the things that are attached to it. The marketing, the branding, the testing, the sending it out. Now, if you remember when she first did the jam, that all went to these micro celebrity friends like the Polo Guy Nachos and people like that, basically saying this jam is brilliant. And actually, that's not a bad idea to get people of influence to talk about your brand. It gets awareness without having you to spend a lot of money. But then it went dead and it went silent and nobody knew. And suddenly we were supposed to believe that Meghan, with these used pots of jam and big sort of tins in her kitchen, her rented kitchen, no doubt, well, there she was slaving over away and potting pots of jam because this was homemade. And again, whoever advised Meghan Markle to allow that mass-produced jars of jam coming down that turntable, well, it just killed anything that she was trying to set up. You instantly knew that this wasn't the case. It wasn't actually, genuine. And then this is your problem. Now, where does the money go? Well, so far, this particular endeavour will have cost Prince Harry a mighty mint. And he believes, or he's convinced at least, that he believes that Meghan Markle is going to turn herself into a billionaire. After all, she had a lot of success with her previous endeavours online, i.e. the TIG. And as I've told you before, this really was just an avenue, a venture to get exposure, to get food, to get clothes to wear. She was a, far down the line, cast list member of a cable TV soap opera. But in her mind, this was big. She created it herself. You see the sort of tick box that she gives herself. I created this. Anybody could do this online. It's not great, particularly if you have a micro profile. You understand? And then, of course, what she decided to do when things were going very difficult, and of course they realized, shall we say, Netflix, that not necessarily going to be making big bucks as was first sold, because let's not forget what they've had so far is a documentary, a business show, an Invictus show, and a flop thing all about polo. So the return on their big bucks is not looking good. The boss, of course, of Netflix, Ted, was forced to come out and basically say, well, Meghan's a genius, she could shift anything. Well, those words may come to bite Ted, because quite frankly, it's proving that she can't. On the recent chat again, she said, it's great that we sold out, but now you've got to think about the reorders. Now, the beauty about having a small boutique business as Meghan has got, well, the real details, the running costs, won't come out until her accounts in around about a year's time. That's when you will really see just how much money has been poured into this vanity project and how much money it's truly made. What Meghan needs now is somebody really of some great stature to say, I'll take the brand on board, I'll help you launch it into various, areas, as I said, high-ranking stores. But so far, they're very reluctant. The results that she's getting back from these people, and again, you have to feel sorry for the staff that have to tell her this, is, well, we'll see how it goes. If you can show us visible results, what's your turnover, how many orders do you have, what about international orders? All of this is going to take time. You see, Meghan, alongside Harry, it has to be said, felt that her name alone would have these big brands, these big companies snapping at their heels. Clearly, don't they just want her? Why would they want anybody else? And then, of course, this happened. One of the strangest things that I've always thought about Meghan Markle was, during her short time within the British monarchy, never once, ever once did she ever say to any of the royal staff or royal chefs, can I go into the kitchen? I really miss being in the kitchen. Is there anything I can help with? Or indeed, could she now make some of her own infamous jam? Let's not forget, the royal gardens have a wide variety of fruit that you could easily have made jam with. And what's also interesting is when you study this, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, let's not forget, is a dab hand in the kitchen, as we've seen. In fact, famously giving the late Queen a jar of her, well, as she says, famous chutney as a Christmas gift. Now, once Meghan had sussed this out, and this is from an excellent source, she couldn't quite believe it, how easy it was to please Her Majesty the Queen. But of course, Catherine and the Queen had built up a friendship over a number of years. Meghan was ready to dart in at a moment's notice and simply do that. That's exactly what she thought she could do. And I believe, and this will be just my personal opinion here, but I believe that she saw exactly how easy that was for Catherine to ingratiate herself. But Catherine didn't do it for that reason. She did it through kindness and the fact that she does in fact enjoy being in the kitchen. The fact that she doesn't put it all over Instagram and beg for likes and stuff like that is totally irrelevant. We know that she cooks with her children because it's been said. Now, Meghan, you see, had another brilliant idea, or so she thought. Once again, she was going to push out the jam idea. American Riviera had virtually died and it cost a lot of money, but that could all be written off as business, right? Now, what happened was something that really derailed her and made Meghan once again rush into pushing out her brand, which was not totally put together. You see, if you recall back when Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was out and about meeting the general public on a royal engagement, there was a delightful moment where the two ladies got talking about jam, and in particular plum jam. And Catherine said, oh, I make that, just sort of chit-chatty type stuff. And, she offered to send the lady the recipe for free, right? Totally for free. Meghan blew a gasket over in Montecito because she apparently believed that this was an absolute snub against her and her brand of what she was trying to do. It gets worse though, because behind the scenes, and from an excellent source, I was told, as ever allegedly, that Fortnum & Masons reached out to Catherine and said if she ever wanted to pursue that sort of particular line, they would be very keen to go down that avenue, even if it was for a charitable event. You get the picture. And of course, as you can imagine, having that sort of royal connection with a very favourite royal store, even if it was just as a one-off to raise money for a particular charity, was something that actually interested Catherine. Not in a spiteful way, but something that she could do. And obviously, as we know, the royals are big fans of that particular store. And that's truly the reason behind the scenes why Meghan had to push hard to get her brand out very quickly. She needed to get out there and be visually seen. And once again, we had all the same problems with not having the right branding, not having the right name checks, patents, all of that sort of stuff. Clearly, Meghan never learns. But behind the scenes, as I said, Ted and Meghan have got problems together. This is truly because, of course, Ted's now put his neck on the line by backing Meghan publicly, stating, as she's put out on a video, that they're now in her business with her. They're partners. She's not just an employee making a television programme. But interestingly, what you will notice is that Meghan, of course, has no mention of that other big adventure that she and Harry were very keen to get out there. Remember, Meet Me at the Lake. They were going to be executive producers. This was Meghan returning back to acting of sorts and suddenly becoming, well, a force to be reckoned with in the entertainment world. When she was at that particular event in the beige dress, if you remember, she told the gushing reporter, "We've got several projects in the pipeline." Well, they've now all gone to pot, including Pearl, which has other problems attached to it and is by nowhere near resolved legally. You get the picture again. So for those of you that were asking exactly how did this interview go down and will it now reshape Meghan Markle's brand moving forward, or Meghan Sussex or HRH, Meghan Markle, whatever she decides to push the envelope to call herself, will it help? Well, my surmise is not at all. The bigger problem is, in fact, Jamie could have done her a worse disservice, because by asking nothing of interest and gushing and telling the world that she had complete body chills over a very simple answer just makes you realise how much in the pocket these people are of Meghan Markle, all the while until, of course, it flops. And many suggest that truly is not too far off. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody, because lots of people will lose lots of money and jobs. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.